This week in Washington, the debate over gun control took center stage once again in the wake of the mass shooting in Orlando. There was a lot of noise on Capitol Hill, but true to form, Congress really didn't resolve much. And that's where we're going to start this morning with Rich Ashew, Republican candidate for the 1st Congressional District. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Josh.
How's everything going?
Thanks for having me. It's going great.
Yeah?
Thank you.
Yeah, so let's talk about where are you when it comes to this gun control debate? I mean, what do you see as an appropriate balance?
Well, this was a horrific tragedy.
Sure.
And, it would be a worse tragedy if we don't learn lessons from it. And, I have a sense of regret that that we ran so quickly, as a nation to the Senate floor, to the House floor, to start debating proposals, most of which are fairly hidebound and represent, positions of the past. Look, there's very troubling circumstances here in that the FBI investigated this individual, a truly disturbed individual, multiple times, and yet deemed him not a threat. That, as a member of Congress, that is the question I would be asking before we move to debate policies. And by the way, I believe those policies should be debated.
Gaps in intelligence, you think, are the priority, though?
Absolutely. Remember, all the debate that's going on now deals with one form of a list or another. Well, those lists are driven in many ways by the FBI, which we now know there was a failing in the system. So before we start deciding, how those lists play a role in the gun control debate, I really think we need to pay attention.
Well, let's look at gun control, though, in a vacuum, because you're going to be asked about this, and people will try to pin candidates down on where they stand, and the message is always very careful on how things are phrased. Where do you come in on this?
So I'm a defender of the Second Amendment. Absolutely, and obviously, we have seen situations where we have to question our current policies, in particular with respect to individuals who are mentally disturbed. I don't believe the answer is to take away everyone's guns in order to deal with a certain specific case.
Even assault weapons?
We need to talk about what you mean by assault weapons. I mean,
AR-15s.
Well, so an AR-15 is not an automatic weapon, and my view is an assault weapon is an automatic weapon. But those, let's keep in mind what happened in Florida could have been that could have been done the same damage with handguns that aren't quite as controversial. It could have also been done Timothy McVeigh style. We need to understand who the threats are. I'm a strong supporter of the Second Amendment, but we have to understand better who are getting these weapons, in particular the environment that we're living in.
So background checks need to be examined.
We never stop examining who gets on those lists and how. We can never stop examining that, and that's in two ways. One is we want to make sure that people who don't belong on those lists, don't get on those lists. But I played cat and mouse in the defense industry against terrorists for years, and they adapt, which means we need to adapt. We need to be ever vigilant. Obviously protecting individuals' rights and due process, we need to be ever vigilant about who we're looking at.
All right, this is something we're going to talk about a lot in the months moving forward ahead of the primary and the general election. Let me ask you what's taking place in Europe right now. We're taping this on Friday. Prime Minister Cameron expected to resign today. This is airing on Sunday. He probably has already resigned at this point, if you're watching. The markets are responding very poorly with the vote to leave the EU by folks in Great Britain. What role does the U.S. play here, if any, do you believe?
Well, we are intertwined. Economically, the U.S., prospers better with a stable, predictable economic union in Europe. No question about that. But the role that the U.S. should not have played was to articulate how we think Britons should vote. And the president did that, and you could probably mark when the tide changed to that point. They don't want to be told who to vote for. They want to be told what to vote for. And in fact, that's what's going on. I think the sentiment that Britons are feeling like they're losing control of their country is a sentiment that many Americans can relate to. So I think there are lessons in there across the board.
Are you concerned that other countries in Europe will take a look at this and say, hey, wait a second, you know what? They're onto something.
Absolutely. I think this is not a contained sentiment. As I said, we're feeling the same thing here. And the idea that that Britons feel like they're losing control to a nameless bureaucracy that's distant from them is something that many Americans can relate to as well.
You think the president should be engaged in discussion with the leaders of these countries just to as you say, everything's intertwined and knowledge is power. Do you think that that's something you should be?
Well, right now the president absolutely needs to be paying attention to the repercussions for the U.S. I think the wrong role was to articulate to that community what they ought to do. I think that was probably not the right thing to do.
Another kind of flew under the radar this week, Supreme Court ruling on President Obama's immigration reform plan. It was an 8-8 vote, basically leaves it on the side of the road. I don't think I've asked you about this. Yeah. When it comes to immigration, what is your philosophy? Be it a wall or tightening up the laws that are already in place?
Yeah, legal immigration needs to work better. I'm a strong proponent of a strong legal immigration. My grandparents were immigrants 100 years ago today, came to work in the mills right nearby. But the fact of the matter is our immigration system is broken. And this was a justified ruling because the president, on his way out the door, is trying to do many, many things via the regulatory system. I thought this was one of the most egregious. That's not the way we're going to get comprehensive immigration reform. Obviously, our borders need to be secured, but this is not a simplistic answer. And you can't look at the 11 million people who are illegal in this country as one block. We're going to have to take a thoughtful approach to this. We haven't seen that yet. I would as a member of Congress.
What about this 8-member court that we're looking at right now with the 4-4 vote? Obviously, we know it's taking place with Mitch McConnell, Kelly Ayotte supporting not listening to the president's nominee until after the election. Where do you come in on this?
I want the process that's going to get us the most conservative justice. It's simple as that. And, I don't know if the stance the Senate Majority Leader has taken is the way to go. I really don't. I mean, I'm generally on the side where, give everybody a fair hearing, because I find that probably is the best way to get the most conservative justice. And I do think we need that balance.
And that could backfire. I mean, we're looking at a situation, we'll see what happens with Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton leading in most national polls. Could there be a reversal, do you think, or should there be a reversal if it looks like that Donald Trump is going to lose and Hillary Clinton is going to be the next president?
One thing we know is we don't know what's going to happen in November. So any strategy, in particular regarding the Supreme Court, that's predicated on figuring what's going to happen after November, I think is probably inherently flawed. My view is, the Senate has a job to do. It's to vet or not vet. They can choose to not vet whoever the president sends up. That's well within their right. I don't fall with those who think that it's some outrage to not consider it. It's their job to decide that. But I would be on the side of taking any nominee, with the clear message that, in my view, that should be a conservative.
We only have a couple of minutes to go. I got to ask you about the latest complaints former State Party Chair Fergus Cullen made to the FEC involving your opponent and the incumbent Frank Ginta here. You don't say much about this out on the campaign trail. Can we expect that to change?
Well, look, this district, the 1st District of New Hampshire, has changed hands every 2 years for the better part of this decade. And part of the reason for that is the representation on both sides has not paid very much attention to the district, in my view, hasn't been listening. And I don't think they want to hear from me very much on this. I do have strong personal opinions on it, and I will say that there's a reason why there's a level of cynicism that's through the roof towards politicians. And it's because a lot of politicians act as though the rules don't apply to them. In this case, you could look at as a great example of that. But no, I don't spend a lot of time talking about it because the voters of the 1st District deserve to hear from me my case for why I'm going to make their lives better.
Well, I can't let you go without talking about Donald Trump. I ask all the Republican candidates about, and Democratic candidates for that matter. Last time you were here, you said, I'm going to run my own race. Donald Trump's, whatever happens there, we'll see what the impact is on the ticket. Are you feeling now more that the Republican Party, though, at the national level, is trying to create a separation between the Donald Trump presidential campaign and everything else, whether it's a Senate race, a congressional race? Do you feel that actively?
Personally speaking, I don't pay very much attention to the national party. I think they could have done a better job managing the whole primary process, and so I really stopped paying attention to the national party and what they're doing. I do think there is that division, though. The voters that I'm encountering, they're not soliciting my opinion on who they should vote for president. And look, I'm unique in this way. Of the candidates for this race that you're going to have on your show, I'm the only one who hasn't picked a presidential candidate. The others have, which means they own those races as well as their own. I don't think the voters want that from me. What they want from me is to make the case to them about why I'm going to be the best representative for them, and that's what I'm fully focused on.
Any special plans this summer? Then we got to run.
Yeah, we're going to work hard. 3 parades on July 4th. 3 parades, so I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, put on your walking shoes and go through a couple of them. Rich Asher, good to see you. Best of luck moving forward.
Thanks, Josh. Great.
Have you back soon.